Joan Quinn Profiles. As an editor for Andy Warhol's Interview, the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner, LA Style, and Detour magazines, Joan covered the social set, the Hollywood hotshots, the international art scene, the mysteries of food, the excitement of travel, and the fabulous world of fashion. Joan continues to find creative people on the cutting edge who make things happen. Here's Joan Agajanian Quinn.
Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and welcome to the Joan Quinn Profiles. Waiting to be profiled is writer, comedian Byron Yee and composer Glenn Paxton. Performer, writer, stand-up comedian Byron Yee grew up in Oklahoma. He earned a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering and Computer Science, and then went on to get an MBA in Finance from the University of San Francisco. You were a dutiful ABC, American-born Chinese, till you moved to San Francisco in the 90s. What were you planning to do when you went to San Francisco?
Well, I was wanting to follow my artistic voice and to try to develop as a stand-up comic. Circumstances came together where I was able to get to San Francisco in the early 90s when the Holy City Zoo was still there. That was the developmental club in all of the United States.
Is that your acting background? Is that where you took the acting lessons?
Well, yeah,
to
in
do
San Francisco,
stand-up?
I started doing stand-up first. I was basically, I would have a mic in hand and a beer and
You mean
get
on
up
your
on stage
own? You didn't train to do it?
No, you can't train to be a stand-up comic. I mean, doing stand-up
Why
comedy,
not?
because you have to fail, and you can't teach it. People try to teach comedy, but it's about getting on stage, and it's about narrative, and it's about connecting with the audience. And so, for many years, I was a stand-up comic, and then at one point, I decided I need to try to become an actor. So I started studying acting in San Francisco.
But when you got to San Francisco, that was totally, had a totally Asian feel compared to Oklahoma City. Is that where you were, Oklahoma City?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the jokes I always say is back in Oklahoma, my apartment was Chinatown. And essentially it was true, because in the 1960s when I grew up, we were one of the few Chinese families in all of Oklahoma. And then, there were some more immigrant groups started to come in. The Vietnamese started to come in with the repatriation of the boat people. They ended up in Oklahoma City and Tulsa and places in Kansas. But for the most part of my life, for the first 28 years of my life, I wasn't around any.
Talking about that is that you knew more about barbecue than dim sum.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I love barbecue. I mean, when I go back to Oklahoma, I'll have chicken fried steak and barbecue.
Were you brought up? You were brought up on that, of course.
I was brought up on that. There were very few Chinese restaurants around. Chinese restaurants are mainly run by the immigrants that come over because the cuisine and things like that. Americans love that type of stuff, but there weren't that many Chinese restaurants in Oklahoma.
But your family didn't do that.
No.
Your father was a professional.
Right. My father was a geologist. He was worked for Exxon, and he was there discovering oil fields. So I was actually born in Kansas, and one of my sisters was born in Tulsa. My other sister was born in Oklahoma City. So, that's where the oil was. That's why
and so he followed that around.
Mm-hmm.
Do you use Oklahoma did you use Oklahoma, or do you use Oklahoma in your stand-up
Oh, absolutely,
routine?
because I'm a fish out of water. I'm a stranger in a strange land. I mean, I'm so unique in Oklahoma, but even more so when I moved to San Francisco, I was even further on the outside, because I was a big Chinese guy that didn't understand Chinese, didn't know Kung Fu, knew very Well, they do, and it's interesting. Most Chinese that grew up between the coasts, have this certain sensibility. I mean, we're out in the plains and we're by ourselves, and we're becoming Americans, is what's happening. And
yeah, but you don't have the camaraderie of groups of people like
not
being
at all.
Asian. Yeah,
not at all. When my father was. In the 1960s and early 70s when we were in Oklahoma, he used to get the Chinese newspapers in the mail, and that was the one way he could keep up what was going on. So my image of him is in his recliner and to be just reading these Chinese newspapers, and I didn't know what was in there. So
you were playing baseball.
I was playing baseball. I had my paper route and playing with the kids in the neighborhood.
Yeah. Did he try to get you to learn to speak Chinese?
No,
or
not really.
read?
I think one of the things is that when immigrant parents come over, one of the things they make a very conscious decision to do is try to get the kids to assimilate.
Right away.
And I did that completely without reservation, and so I never really was interested in Chinese culture, even though my parents would speak Chinese around the house.
They did, but you didn't pick up anything?
Didn't pick up at all.
Like when you hear people talk to you now, you don't?
No, absolutely not.
Nothing sounds familiar?
Not at all. I mean, I would spend so much time out of the house or watching TV or playing with the other kids. And then the other thing too is my mom and dad would talk about us kids in front of us.
Yeah.
We'd always know they were talking. It says you'd hear the Byron. I said I don't want to. I don't want to know what they're talking about. You can.
But
talk about me
that happened. My family never spoke a word of Armenian.
Mm-hmm.
I heard my grandparents speak it. But when I hear people speak, I can bring back some of those things.
Yeah.
That's why I'm surprised that you
I
didn't.
completely shut it out.
Totally.
Absolutely, yeah.
Why did you write Paper Sun? Because you were talking about acting,
Yeah.
and Paper Sun is a one-person play that you've done in Europe,
Yeah,
San
all throughout
Francisco.
Canada, right. Part of it was out of frustration as an artist. Stand-up comedy is a young person's game. You can only do so many jokes. You can only do so many hecklers and deal with these
young
one-nighters
person,
and
you're
things.
young.
Yeah, well, but after a while, you kind of get stymied artistically because I was able to express myself. But in doing Paper Sun, I was trying to explain what it was like being a Chinese guy from Oklahoma, and then that ended up juxtaposing itself to being a Chinese guy trying to get into entertainment, trying to audition
right.
for roles
That
and
was
things
funny.
like that.
What happened in that?
Well, I
situation?
auditioned for the movie Grumpier Old Men, and they had written a part for a wacky Chinese restaurant owner who spoke broken English, and I can't do a Chinese accent. I can't do a Chinese accent to save my life. But my agent didn't know any better, could care less, just said, hey, come down here and get the role so I can make my commission. So I flew down here to Los Angeles. I was in San Francisco at the time, and I auditioned in front of the casting director. And I could, I did the best pidgin English Chinese you could possibly fake.
You thought.
Yeah, well, but the casting director didn't know any better because I learned from Charlie Chan and Kung Fu and Fu Manchu, who are actually white guys playing Chinese guys. So
you
sounded
played
right.
it the same way.
I sounded like I thought it was. But in going back to San Francisco, I realized that there was something that wasn't right about it. I couldn't exactly quite pinpoint it, and so I started to explore that theme. And when I started to originally write the one-man show, it was about this whole thing of being a fish out of water. But more than anything else, as I started to develop it, I realized I knew nothing about my father's life, about his coming to America.
He died when you were very young.
He died when I was 11 years old, and there wasn't much of a connection, and he never talked about coming to America. So I assumed that his story died when he passed away.
I see.
Never a word about his coming over. I remember asking as a young kid, tell me how you came to America on a boat, and that was basically it.
That was it.
Yeah.
But I think that's part of his getting you to assimilate.
Possibly so, but also because the circumstances of what he came over was through the Chinese Exclusion Act, and he was a paper son. So these are very embarrassing things and very shameful things to the Chinese that came to the United States.
Well, that was the interesting part of it, because the play, I'm going to call it a play, it's done in five different scenes, was funny, but it was poignant. And when you started talking about your father coming over, you made the play his play in a way.
Right.
And
well, it's two stories. It's kind of like The Godfather Part 2, which is, you have Michael's story and you have, Vito Corleone's story, and that's essentially kind of what it is a Chinese version of that, because I have my own story about trying to make my way in America, but then to discover myself, I go back to my father's story and find his immigration and the circumstances by which he came, and the truth behind, his coming to America.
so essentially, it just bound the two of you together.
Right, and it's also discovering my relationship with my father, because we were distant. It was an immigrant father and a kid that wanted to be American, and so I, ran as far away from that as possible.
The funny thing is, when I was sitting in the audience, nobody knows who you are, and I'm always listening to what people are saying, and the audience was, to me, almost three-quarters.
Actually, the poem translations, there are 4 poems I do in the play, and as I do the poems, the banners that represent these poems light up, and if you know, once I start speaking it, then people can start to put together, because, you know, these...
But they didn't get it at that point, because it was ahead of, it was before, and even though they could read it, they didn't know it was poetry.
Right, they didn't know the context of it was,
exactly.
and the thing is, but this is what the people that came to America from 1910 to 1940, the Chinese were in Angel Island, were so despondent they couldn't talk to anyone, so they ended up carving these poems on the walls. They're very haunting, but they show the immigrant experience for the Chinese.
Yeah, I thought that was really great, the way they were like relating to it, and they knew what it was, but it wasn't something that they really understood, and until probably after you explained what that was all about.
Absolutely, I do. There's an old man character I do who's giving the tours of Angel Island. He's explaining it when it turns out that's his story, and that's based on someone that I met at Angel Island.
What was that turning point for you when you actually got to Angel Island? Because you didn't find what you wanted at Angel Island.
No, I didn't. Well, I had a journal, and I remember writing it, and I said, well, I'm out here, and I think my family has some type of connection to this place, but I'm not sure. And it became a detective story for me. I pushed my mother, who knew something but really wouldn't tell, but I was given a clue of my, my uncle in New York.
But your mother came from a rather prominent family.
Absolutely, yeah. My mother was the daughter of a diplomat, and my grandfather was Consul General of the United States, and he was in Pearl Harbor.
So maybe she didn't want to tell you those things.
Yeah, well,
or did she know?
She knew. Well, the Asian mothers have selective amnesia.
Exactly.
That's a very common thing I found out. And it's things that it's very difficult for her to talk about, because she can talk for, you know, hours about her side of the family. But my father's side of the family, there's so much shame involved, and it's always about saving face and not wanting to offend anyone.
Right.
But I'm completely American, so I, you know, don't mind offending everyone.
Right.
I'm a comedian. You got to offend everyone.
But the other funny thing is, like, you're part of the diaspora. You live in the diaspora, really.
Yeah.
And yet you're so American. You can't really be accepted by the Americans because your look is not American.
Well, that's it from the outside, but once you get to know me in a bar or a football game or things like that, I'm the same. You know,
but that's the funny thing about that kind of diaspora, Chinese diaspora or Japanese.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting. People will read into me different things, and I think I've lived my life, especially growing up in Oklahoma, and really nice, salt-of-the-earth people. Not exactly the sharpest crayons in the box, but, you know, they're really good place they come. They're very nice. They're super nice, and you know, the best and brightest of us ended up, you know, leaving, coming to the West Coast.
We talked about this being a play rather than a stand-up thing.
Right. Yeah, it's not stand-up. Yeah.
And you needed a director, I suppose. Right. So you found Glenn Chin.
Yes.
How did he fit into it?
Well, I had interviewed another director from East West Players, and she recommended me to Glenn. And so when I found Glenn, I gave him the script, and he calls me up. He goes, "Hey, you know this audition you went for? I went up for the same audition for Grumpier Old Men."
Oh.
And so we had that in common. And plus, he's a little bit older than I am, but he shared the same experience because he grew up in Stockton, you know, and so he was the only Chinese kid in the block, and had a lot of things going on, and so.
So he understood how to direct you?
Well, yeah.
I mean, do you need a director at that point?
Absolutely. No, I've been doing this thing for many years without a director because I was a stand-up, and I couldn't find the right person in San Francisco. But when I met Glenn, he understood the material very, very clearly, and he knew exactly the suggestions to give to me and how to handle me, because as my own instincts were pretty sound in some areas, but I needed some polishing in some others. So we worked quite well together, and you know, we had a lot of unspoken stuff, you know, between us.
So if Paper Sun goes someplace else from the Gascon in Culver City, if it goes to another theater, do you go with Glenn?
Yeah, Glenn's going to be my director on this piece, you know, wherever it goes. When I take it to colleges and universities, if I take it to New York at some point, I definitely want Glenn involved because his, you know, he is. It's his material also. It's his story also.
And before we leave, how proud are you now that you found your background?
Oh, I'm enormously proud. I mean, it's interesting. I think when you get old, when you're younger, you could care less. When you get older, you start to question these things about your background and your life. And so I'm very proud to have found my father's story, and I can present it and present my own story and weave it in for this, you know, 85-minute play that I do on stage.
It's great. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you. Thanks,
and Byron Yee, thank you for being with us.
My pleasure.
And thank you for watching this part of the show. Don't go away, because we'll be back with composer Glenn Paxton. Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and welcome back to the Joan Quinn Profiles. Composer Glenn Paxton was born and raised in rural Illinois. Glenn is an Emmy-nominated composer of musicals, classical music, and his work has been featured on television specials, documentaries, and in the movies. Lots of music in the movies. Did your career start before Princeton or after Princeton?
I started in music when I was 8 years old.
Before college.
Before college. I had like the only epiphany in my whole life. I never had another one. My aunt had subscribed to some, Chicago Tribune was putting out a series of pieces by famous composers, and you get one each month, you know, on a record. And this month it was Mozart's 40th Symphony, and I had no interest in music at all. I was 8 years old, and I just put it on, and really my whole life changed. I just played it again and again and again, and I got my mother to listen to it, and I begged my father to listen to it, but he was a very busy lawyer, and he never had any time to listen to it. So then I asked him for piano lessons, and I took the lessons, and my first teacher said I had no talent, and which some other people have agreed with over the years. But then I finally got a great teacher, and I was off and running. And
well, did you continue your musical training all the way up through college then?
Oh yes, I did.
Were you composing then?
Oh, I was composing. I started composing when I was about 10.
Oh,
yeah.
you did?
Yes, and I remember writing in ink because I felt that anything as important as writing music had to be in ink, because ink was the important way to write, and I couldn't handle it, and I got ink all over my clothes.
What instrument were you using to
Piano.
compose? You were using the
Yeah.
piano, and you knew how to do it and how to write it.
I from the very beginning, I'm sure what I wrote. Well, no, I have some pieces I wrote at that time, and they're not original really, but they're kind of well constructed for simple pieces. You know.
How does a composer get his work recognized? I think that's probably the hardest part. I mean, besides your mother and your teacher and schoolmates.
It's like everything else in showbiz. I think that, and in the arts, it just requires some luck and a lot of hard work. And
but will people listen to it?
Well, sure. When I got my roommate and I in college, at Princeton we have a traveling show that goes around, a musical show that the students write themselves. It's very old. It's been there for more than 100 years, the Triangle Show. And we wrote our senior year, the Triangle Show. And then we went to, after the service, we went to New York, and we said, well, all right, we're going to write songs together. Well, that's a pretty hard thing to do. But one day, some people that he knew met us on the street, and they said they were looking for somebody to write a musical to Pride and Prejudice. And they worked for Julie Stein, but there was a general manager and some other people. And so we started working on this, and one day they found that somebody else was doing a musical of Pride and Prejudice in England, so their lawyer said, you've got to get an announcement in the paper, at least to put in your claim. And so they did, and Julie, who was out on the coast, read that, and it was in Variety, I think, and he called and said, what are you doing behind my back? You've got this musical going, and he said, I want to hear it. So we went into his apartment one day. We never even had a song published, and we played about 5 songs, and he said, I'm going to produce it on Broadway. And he did.
Is that how that happened?
That's how that happened. And he brought in Abe Burrows to direct it, and he cast it with Polly Bergen and Hermione Gingold and Farley Granger and Phyllis Newman, a whole lot of people.
Well, he must have been like, I don't know, your mentor at that point?
He was, because for a year then I worked on this musical, and he constantly said no. He had to really teach me about writing a musical.
Did he write music too?
No.
He didn't write music.
You mean not for this show?
No, any music. Did he write music?
Julie? Oh,
yeah.
Julie was a famous composer.
Yeah,
he wrote Gypsy and a million.
He wrote a lot of things,
million.
but he sat there and let you write the music for this?
Let me write the music for this, and taught me.
That's really...
And taught me how to say, you can't do this here, you can't do this here, you've got to repeat this here, you've got to, maybe I wrote it in 4/4, 3/4, and he'd say, no, put it in 4/4, all those kinds of things. And he'd say, just teaching all the time, teaching.
That was better than any school. You couldn't learn that anywhere.
No. And I personally don't know of any other composer who had that kind of training with a really famous Broadway composer.
So you started then being, I mean, successful on Broadway, but you write operas, you write music for TV and for, how do those different types of music fit into what you're doing? How do you get your brain ready to do those kinds of different things?
I think everything has to do with me, everything has to do with images. I'm really a dramatic composer. When I see a face on a screen, then I begin to get ideas, like what's going on underneath the actor's mind. He may be, or she may be, talking about something, this or that or the other thing, but what's going on beneath that somewhere, you know? And maybe that's not completely apparent in the film, or sometimes
that
even,
would be in a film or something. Yes. where you're scoring after it's been done.
After, like the producer might even say, or the director might even say, look, I wanted this and this and this. I wanted fear and excitement and something else, and all I got in the scene so far with the actors is this and this and this. So you give me the other thing.
So then you put the music in to show that.
Yeah, to add the other element which he thinks is missing. You know.
Have you ever conducted?
I don't like to conduct.
And is that a special, that's different from composing?
You know, it's like playing the clarinet or something. You have to be good at it, you know. And when I first came here and started doing scores, I said I would not conduct them. And I know my agent said, you just have to because everybody does. And I said, no, I'm just going to hire conductors. And now, everybody, a lot of people do that.
Well, when you did come here, did you start right out in film? Is that what you were doing?
Yeah, my first job in California was a film called When the Legends Die, which starred Richard Widmark and Frederick Forrest and at Fox. So, and I had Lionel Newman, the famous.
Beautiful music, right?
So I said, Lionel, please conduct this score. He said, oh, I'd love to. And
so you had like really well-known conductors conducting your music, your compositions.
Yes, in New York it was always Alfredo Antonini. For all the television scores I was doing in New York. You know.
What's the process when you're going to write something? Say, film you already told us about, but you write for dance as well.
Well, with dance, I think you'd have to work with the choreographer.
Is that what you do?
Yeah, the choreographer will say, I need a certain amount of, we're going to do a certain amount of this and that. Maybe not like 10 seconds of this, but a movement in a certain, but for classical music, like the piece which we just did with Shauna Blake Hill singing Sarah's Diary, 9/11, which is a series of 5 pieces, a kind of a musical monologue, really, about a woman who was pregnant at the time of 9/11, and her husband was killed, and it follows her for about a year afterwards. And Shauna Blake Hill is the soprano. Does the most superb job. She's a great actress and a great singer. And Victoria Kirsch plays the piano, and she is one of the great collaborative pianists. And my collaborator in this, in the script, was Leroy Aarons, who wrote this piece after watching television shows about a group of about 8 women who had all been pregnant at the time of 9/11, and they became sort of well known. They were on lots of television shows in New York and in California.
So, would you call it an opera?
It's not an opera.
It's not an opera.
It's, I would call it a dramatic musical monologue, perhaps. It's about 33 minutes long.
Oh, I thought
just
it was...
one character, and she just sings this whole thing, you know.
You've performed this, or they performed it at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. It was on the radio.
It was on, yeah, a classical music station. Yeah.
But if it's only 33 minutes, how does that fit in with other programs? Would it be like a musical program with many?
Right. In this case, there was another piece along with it, and you know, there would always be something along with it.
There always has to be something along with it. Yeah. So would you write something that would go along with it?
Yes, I have some things right here in my pocket that would go along with it, yes.
That would work?
Yes.
So would something like this be accepted in Europe or touring?
Oh, I think it would be wonderful. I think what I would like to see is to see Shauna Blake Hill and Victoria Kirsch do a program, a full-length program, and tour it all over in Europe, and
But you wouldn't add to this piece now, Sarah's Diary.
No,
you
no.
wouldn't add to that.
Oh,
That's
no, that's
finished.
it. Then I take another piece and stick it along with it. Maybe, if not for her, maybe for another singer, you know. But anyway, it would all go together.
Fit together. You wrote Monticello. Monticello.
Right.
Is that an opera?
That is an opera.
Oh,
yes.
okay. How do you write an opera? I mean, especially nowadays, nobody writes operas now, do they?
Oh, they do. They do. Actually, you'd be surprised. There are lots of them written. It's just very hard to get them done. It's hard to get them done because they cost so much.
Is that really the basic thing, or do people just think that you have to have Mozart and...
No, they're willing to accept new operas, but they're wildly expensive. Somebody once said the only thing more expensive than war is opera. And, you know, it makes a lot of sense. It really is. It's just
Tell
terribly
us
expensive.
why.
Well, because it's like a very big play. It usually has sets and it has costumes and the singers are expensive, and then you have an orchestra of some kind, and you know, pretty soon it can be $1 million. You know.
How long does it take to write? How long did it take you to write Monticello?
About 3 months.
3 months?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
For something that gigantic?
Yes, and again, Shauna Blake Hill played the.
I'm going to hold this and see if we can get it, because this is just the ending of it, isn't it?
She's playing Sally Hemings. It's about Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings and the relationship between them, and she's right there taking a bow, and there's Jefferson, Peter Halverson playing Jefferson, and that was at California Plaza downtown in Los Angeles.
And how long was the opera?
About 100 minutes.
And how long did it took you 3 months to write it? It was 100 minutes. And did you go back and use any of those childhood memories that you had? Did those come into something like this?
I think they're always there. You know, the thing is just like a writer using childhood material. I think it's always there, even if you don't want it to be. When I was a little kid, I went to live with my grandparents, and they lived on a farm in southern Illinois.
That's what I was wondering.
And they were from the South, and they had all this music going on all the time. You know, people playing instruments and singing.
But farm music, would you say?
I would say old Southern country music.
Oh, country music.
Kind of with a sly quality to it, by which I mean it's winking at you a lot of the time. You know, it's
so you hear
slightly
that?
humorous and fast rhythms and I wrote an album of music based on that called Prairie Indigo, which I got a lot of stations in this country playing, maybe 150 or 200, and that completely related to that kind of music. But I think it's always there in anything I write. You know, it's just there. You can't root it out.
Oh, it's very interesting, and I'm so glad you were here with us today.
Thank you, Joan.
Glenn Paxton. I'm going to say
yes.
Paxton.
Yes.
And look for your name on all of these things that you've been composing. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan.
And thank you for watching the Joan Quinn Profiles. Keep writing to 777 South Figueroa, 44th floor, Los Angeles 917. We'll see you next time on the Joan Quinn Profiles.